Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much. I'm looking around and I got a lot fewer emails than I'm seeing faces, so it's wonderful. And people who I haven't seen in a while that have participated and assisted me in the past, and that's pretty terrific also. I'm Donna Capobianco, for those of you who don't know me, and I know there are some people who are relatively new to the village. And I sincerely appreciate you coming out, and in deference to the fact that you were courteous enough to be here, I'm going to start on time for us. Tonight is going to be a little bit of fun, hopefully, as well as maybe some learning. And what I've really asked you to come to participate in is a vision. And a vision is just that. A vision is just seeing out from one's head and saying, could things be different? And the vision that forms from that. And each of us have our own visions, but this one, as we work through for the next 90 minutes, hopefully you'll see how it was formed, why it was formed, and where it can go. So I'm going to start really with a few definitions. Few definitions, we don't need too many, but one is the Florida statute, and you'll see at the very bottom in yellow, allows for what's called multi-condominium associations. Now, you also see multi-condominiums. We're really going to focus tonight, partially, on the multi-condominium associations. And it is allowed for and provided for in Florida Statute 718 under what's called special types of condominiums. So if you're a little bit intrigued, hold your hat. Another definition is condominium. This one we get, this can cause us a problem. Under 718, the condominium, when you say I live in a condominium, my condominium, that form of ownership of real property. Basically, the condominium is the property. It's the building. It's the land. It is the physical property owned by one or more persons with undivided shares in the common elements. But the condominium, when we use the term condominium, it is the property, the real property. Ownership of real property, land, buildings by the unit owners. Association. Now, why is that different than condominium? It is completely different. An association, according to the statute, means, in addition to any entity responsible for the operation of the common elements. Entity responsible for the operation of the common elements, where membership in the entity is composed exclusively of unit owners. So condominium is the physical building and the land. It's the real property. Your condominium association is the entity responsible for the operation of the common elements. Two very different things. And very frequently we interchange those words, or we hear them interchanged. And it's important for our purposes tonight to have a good sense of what each one of them are, so that we don't get confused now or hopefully in the future. So if we talk about condominium, condominium is the what? The buildings, the property, real property, meaning it is tangible, real property. It's not conceptual, it's tangible, real property. And the association, only responsibility of the association is for what? Operation. It's the operating arm. Exactly. Good, you got it. Perfect. Corporation formed, and they didn't have to be. Years ago, prior to 1977, I think, you did not have to form a corporation, but corporations formed for the purpose of operating and managing the condominium property. Make sense? Good. Good distinction. Definition of demised property. Demised. It doesn't mean dead. Okay? The word demised. It doesn't mean dead property. It doesn't mean fallow property. The definition of demised property, the word demised, that phrase demised property really just refers to leased property. That's all it means, leased property. And in our village, we have a segment of the village that comes under this definition. Does anybody know what the leased properties are? Recreation properties. We are in a lease. It was a perpetual 100-year lease. That has changed. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go. But the words demised property, when you hear them, that's all it means. They're talking about the leased property. Okay? Perfect. That's enough of definitions for this point in time. Let's really get into the vision of the future. I'm going to spend a considerable period of time on the history because in order to understand where my vision is coming from, and I take responsibility for the vision, so don't shoot anybody else. If you're going to shoot arrows, you shoot them at me. It's very important to have a sense of the history. Then we'll talk about where we are today and what my thoughts are as we go forward in terms of that vision. So let's start with the history. Palm Beach Daily News, 1967, Irwin Levy and the beginning of CVE. Now, Irwin Levy, the original developer, he came from the north with his family. He had a couple of young kids and his wife, came and spent a holiday in the Miami area. Fell in love, thought this was the greatest thing in the world. He was a commercial realtor. Said, this is fabulous, didn't want to go home, told his wife as soon as they got home, we're selling, we're moving to Florida. And they did. And they moved to Palm Beach. And Irwin was approached by a friend who proposed this idea of these villages that would be like Grossingers. All right? That was the concept. We can build these things, they'll be like Grossingers here in Florida. Just think of it. And people would live there. They wouldn't just drive to the Catskills. They'd live there. They'd live in a Grossingers. Picture that. Irwin Levy loved the idea. The partner backed out immediate. He wasn't in for very long. Irwin carried it forward and really believed in it. So in 1967, he birthed the concept, and now I'll ask you the big hot question. Where do you think he marketed to? What do you think, New York? Absolutely. He marketed in Miami. I know, most of us think he must have marketed to New York or something, right? He did not. He started his marketing in Miami, and that's where he really turned his marketing for many, many years. He felt, when he came down to visit that time, what made him want to come here, and of course what this idea, which was not his originally, but made him feel that it was really worthwhile, was the fact that he said, and these were his words quoted out of the Miami Beach Daily News, his thought was, I came there and I saw all these old people sitting on patios. They were looking at the ocean, but they had nowhere to go. They had nothing to do. They were sitting on their patios. Sound valid? Certainly was to him. So he started marketing in Miami. In the 70s and 80s is when he first began, and he started with Century Village in West Palm Beach. That was his very first project. And the second was Century Village East Deerfield Beach. There were 4 CVEs. These 2 were the beginning. They were the beginning. Communities of multiple condominiums. Condominiums meaning what? Buildings, properties, each with its own association. Its operating manager, exactly. Each with its own association. The two villages were built alike in that regard. In the 80s and 90s, a change occurred. He built Century Village Boca, and he built Century Village Pembroke Pines. Now, these were communities of area condominiums, more than one building. And each area had its association. And he built them in such a way that for the most part, the buildings in the area kind of look like a Grantham. Grantham is probably our primary example, but very different in the way they were legally established. All of the buildings surrounding a swimming pool. Makes sense. That association, who owns the pool? Under most of these types of setups, the association, actually the condominiums, it's part of the ownership of land. And just so you know, we'll see that more frequently in what's called Wynmore. How many of you are familiar with the Wynmore complex? Wynmore was the last of the large projects that Irwin did. It is not a Century Village, but it is under, or was under, community of area condominiums with area associations. Financially and legally, it was easier for Levy to commit to building one condominium at a time. And there were legal issues around that for developers because they had to build based on certain percentage of sales, and they couldn't just keep building and building, so it costs sometimes a little bit more on the legal side, but financially and legally it was much easier for Levy to commit to building one at a time. And with each condominium in Century Village West Palm and Century Village Deerfield Beach came an association. Condo, association. Developers do not live in their creations. Developers do not live in their creations. Didn't take Levy too long to figure out that his first two projects were not necessarily an ideal setup. By 1972, Century Village East, which is really what we're going to focus on, grew to 253 condominiums and 253 associations. Marketing. Now, we already said he was marketing to Miami. Would you like to see what the marketing looked like?
I already know, I've seen it.
1981, this is an ad, YouTube, God love YouTube. In 1981, this ad ran for Boca.
Buy or not to buy? No question about it. Buy now at Century Village at Boca Raton. Prices will never be lower, financing never better. Safe, secure Century Village. Entertainment, sports, activities all day, all year. To buy or not to buy? Hey, more than 33,000 people enjoy Florida's most successful way of life. Call Century Village today. Tomorrow, maybe too late. It was dark when I got dressed this morning.
Call now, toll free.
That's on YouTube. It's amazing what you can find today on YouTube. Pretty amazing. But that was the marketing. It was running in 1981 for Boca. 1976, CVE was formed. So CVE was not there when the developer originally built, but in 1976, CVE was formed. And the purpose of CVE, if you read the CVE documents, was to assist, very important word, assist all associations utilizing committees to research and negotiate on behalf of the associations. But they had no legal authority to act. Now you had all 253 individual condominiums, which we know are the buildings, and you had 253 associations. The ability to act upon making contracts and bringing people in to assist and do all of that are the responsibility of the association. CVE had no legal authority to be able to do that. However, CVE was joined together and put together in order to assist. Now, in 1981, CVE added the Recreation Committee. CVE coordinated an association lawsuit against the developer. The rec lease terms were reduced from 99 years to 40 years, and that was one of CVE's very first accomplishments, because the state of Florida then allowed for these perpetual leases to be sued upon. In other words, associations could take lawsuits against the developer and say, reduce the lease. All of the Century Villages, for the most part, did that. Boca got theirs, I think, reduced to 35 years. Nobody ever used, I guess, the same attorneys, I'm not sure, but ours was reduced to a 40-year, and that's why in 2019, the recreation or demised properties will convert over to the owners of Century Village. So CVE put together a very good proposition here, worked with all of the associations to do that. Recreation is the committee that oversees the leased property operation and budget. They do not have necessarily decision-making authority. That's the management company who owns and operates. 1983, master management was formed after 10 years. Purpose of that, developer definitely wanted out. He no longer wanted to have to manage the facilities, the common elements and areas that were not part of the demised property. And maintenance and administration of those common elements was really big. We're a huge village. So anything that wasn't under the recreation lease, the developer was now ready to turn over and created master management. 1988 to 2005. For 17 years, pretty much, CVE was ruled as one entity. And if this looks blurry to you, it's deliberate. There were very blurred lines between associations, CVE, recreation, master management, and blurred is being nice. It was pretty blurry. Now, I moved into the village in 2003. When I came to the village in 2003, a couple of things struck me. I had been, how many of you were condominium dwellers before moving to Century Village? Anybody here? There's not usually too many, only a few. Okay, I had been a condominium dweller most of my married life, which I married almost 40 years, and my husband and I had owned several, and we were always participating in them and on board, so we got to see what they were like from different perspectives. And when I saw the documents of CVE, my mom wanted to live here. And we came because my mom was ill, and we moved here and brought her here, and because she needed care and help. But as I'm reading the docs, I'm calling the state of Florida, and I had the financial office down in Tallahassee going nuts, because I would call and say, is it legal, these lease things? Oh yes, they're legal. Is it legal to have all of these separate, yeah, oh yeah, that's all legal. So it was quite a different environment for me, very different.
From up north?
Yes, from up north.
Having lived in Florida.
And it's not in the South, and in Virginia they have them as well, but up north you don't see these things. So for me, living up north or living in Virginia, I was asking a lot of questions. And I will take questions at the end, because we're going to set up the mic over there. So if we go through anything and you have a question about anything that we're talking about, please jot it down, and you're going to be able to get up and ask questions after. I really couldn't make heads or tails of the CVE governance. I could pretty much understand the documents. They're relatively straightforward. But I couldn't understand the governance of this big, giant entity. I read about separate entities, but then here I am here in 2003, and I'm saying, but I don't hear anything about separate entities. They're just all one and the same. CVE, at that time, was the only open meeting. Meetings were held September through May, summer, basically. was shutdown time for the most part. Half the village was still going up north. In 2004, I was still asking the question, how is CVE governed? Here's the answers I got. Trinchy and his guys take care of everything. That was answer number one. Trinchy and his guys take care of everything. Answer number two, Cook-V runs everything. Rec, master, what are you worried about? Cook-V runs everything. And don't worry about anything and stop asking questions. And those were actual things that were said to me on multiple occasions. I even tried to run at one point for a position on master management, and they wouldn't even entertain the thought. At that time, you didn't even get as far as filling out an application in those days. Cook-V meetings were open. They were a little bit different. For the most part, the directors were basically told what to do, and they were run a little bit differently. Master management and rec meetings were closed to most people at that time. Cook-V office was the answer place for everything. Lines of people were waiting to have an audience. It was a very important place. Very. Lines. You had a question? Go to Cook-V. And it wasn't just presidents. Anybody in the village that had a question or had a problem with their association, go to Cook-V. They'll straighten it out for you. 2004, how associations operated. Big question. Presidents basically were superintendents. I was watching this in my own building and in my mom's building, saying, whoa, you know, this is a little different. I wasn't used to that in the condominiums I lived in at all. And either Ray or I, my husband or I, were always belonged to the directorship of the associations. We always ran for offices. So that was strange. They were operating and maintaining the common areas, but they were also doing stuff inside the units. Oh, I got a leaky sink. Oh, don't worry, Mrs. Stone, I'll be there in a minute. Doing a lot of work inside the units, and I'm like, whoa, this is different. So I got on my association board. They did entertain having me on the board, which was lovely of them. 2005 and 2006 were very pivotal years in my estimation. And again, this is all, you know, coming from me. So again, if you're going to sling arrows, sling them at me. But we all have our own thoughts. 2005, 2006 pivotal years. And I think some of you share some of these thoughts. On February 4th, 2005, Mr. Trinchetella died. That was a pivotal moment after 17 years. October 24th, 2005, Wilma hit. I was asked at that time to take over as president of Oak Ridge V, and I did attend a Cook-V meeting, and at that point they were absolutely chaotic, very angry, very long, very difficult to sit through. Master and Cook-V now had separate presidents. Wilma destruction was unbelievable. Many association board presidents had either left or they quit, and that was the reason I was asked. Our president just got too sick trying to handle what was going on, and he said, would you please take it over? And the board said, please, and we did. And it was fine. Cook-V was a registered agent for all associations with no legal authority to actually act on their behalf, except to negotiate and do the things they did. They couldn't or weren't supposed to be, you know, signing things and putting things together. Cook-V purchased association insurance policies, which is kind of interesting because after Wilma, it made for some very interesting things going on. 2006, I was elected to the Master Management Board, and I was working closely at this point with Cook-V, with Sendir, the Rec Committee, but mostly Cook-V and Sendir, via Master Management and what we needed to do there. And I was finally starting to learn how CVE operated and how it was governed. Major, major changes taking place. Association boards, presidents have all the responsibilities and little or no help or training to fulfill them. That was the impression and the feeling I had in 2006. I got involved, started conducting new president training, and I did it for that year because just from my background, if you want to know if you know something, try to teach it. And it's a great way. I learned a tremendous amount in that process, and some of you in this room were actually in some of those classes. We had a good time. We learned a lot and tried to help each other. In 2007, chaired a CVE committee to study and make recommendations on the CVE long-term contract with Century Maintenance and Management. Now, CVE actually put the contract together for all the associations with Century Maintenance and Management. How many of you remember who Century Maintenance and Management is? Some. Our newer people don't. We did the first opinion survey, and the opinion survey results, this was like what a Seacrest or an East Coast is today, except they operated for everybody as a single entity. And they actually did work not only for the associations, they did all of the work for master management, and they were often called upon by Sendir. Over 80% of the association presidents actually responded. They were quite excited about the survey. And Century Maintenance and Management got pretty poor marks at that point for service. 90% of the biggest complaints were in one area, though, which was really interesting because it opened my eyes. I wasn't aware of it, but some of the people on the committee were. Guess what the #1 biggest complaint area was?
Failure to respond.
Irrigation. Who said it back there? Absolutely. It was irrigation. That was the biggie. So it only took how many years to do something? And this wasn't new. This was an old issue. Had been a very long-term reoccurring complaint, which I was just learning at that time. So CMM had contracts with CVE for all associations, master management, and they were frequently hired by Sendir. In 2007, at that time, associations were responsible for, now this one really, I couldn't quite figure out, how could an association be responsible for the irrigation on their, on their property when the system wasn't the association system? It's like, well, how do you have to have responsibility for something that really you have no control over for the most part? Paving of parking streets. We know what parking streets are. If you drive through Markham or whatever, it's a street where you see, parking spaces all around the sides. There was never any definitive who's responsible for what. It was awfully hard to get answers at that time, and a lot of issues were coming up around that. And again, difficulty. If you figure paving all the way to the center of the street, that's pretty heavy-duty stuff for an association to have to pay for if you run into trouble. And we had some pretty difficult streets. We were now close to 30-some-odd years old, about 30, 31 years old, and wasn't a lot of infrastructure assistance going on for those periods, for that period of time. So just a lot of patching and things like that. So it was getting a little bit shaky. And associations were responsible for their border waterways, which again I found kind of interesting. And where I learned about that was after Wilma, because a lot of things were flown from buildings and many things flew into our lake system. And we would get calls at master management from presidents of buildings saying, there's stuff that fell in the lake, we need to get it cleaned out. Shouldn't master management be responsible for this? And I'm thinking, probably, but I couldn't get a straight answer except, no, the associations are responsible for their border waterways. So in 2008, master management, because it is allowed to under its documents, did take over the waterways. We legally did all the research, irrigation, parking street responsibility, and things started to change. CVE negotiated maintenance and management contracts with Seacrest, and this was on behalf of the associations. The associations were actually asked to sign their own. We came for meetings here, but the associations now were being asked to do their own thing, but CVE did the negotiation, which was wonderful. CVE and master management both did let CMM go, and those two entities hired Seacrest. Key personnel from CMM, from Century Maintenance, did form East Coast, and 253 associations now had separate maintenance and management contracts with Seacrest or East Coast. Now this was 2008. So all of this had been going on, all of this history, this long period of time of really things being kind of crazy and strange. And whatever you thought, good or bad, of how somebody did something, the interesting part was some of it kind of made sense in the sense that the developer, who his son, in a letter to us this past year, did disclose that his father did realize after the first 3 to 4 years that he had made a big mistake by having every association attached to one condominium, and that it was nightmarish. So forming CVE was one way of trying to help and put things together. The problem was it didn't have a foundation or a seating in terms of being able to act for those condominium associations. Associations are now, 2008, they're autonomous. CVE stopped combining insurance policies. Everybody had their own. Recreation Committee was investigating spending prices, doing a great job. We really started to see some wonderful activity going on at that time, and some people doing great work. I take no credit for that. There were a lot of people doing some great things in trying to say, okay, let's uncover this and let's see where we are. Master management, taking more operating and maintenance control of the non-demised property common elements. All of that just really started happening in the 2007-2008 period, very recent history. So a recap real quick. Developer established CVE with 253 independent condominiums and associations. CVE was formed to unify 253 associations, but they had no legal authority to act. All they could really do was negotiate for. 17 years, CVE ruled under one. Those blurred lines. It was amazing. 2006 to now, that amazing turned into progress. CVE, Rec Committee, Master Management, all really have been working very hard to be open, to operate as legally as possible, and it's really turned many things around, which is pretty terrific for all of us. So where are we today? Where are we today? 253 condominiums, 253 associations, operating independently, doing all the same things. I'm still seeing it. So all the way from 2003 when I moved here until currently, that piece of it has really never changed. And all I kept thinking for that whole time was, there's gotta be a simpler way to do this. There's gotta be something better than this. 253 independent associations. Now, these are just some of the things. Most of the people here are on boards, and if not, you know most of the things your board members do, hopefully. We do a lot. There's an awful lot that an association has to do. We have 253 independents. So if you look at the yellow circle, there's 253 dots in that yellow circle. I counted. 253. 253 associations doing all of these things, all the same, some differences depending on the property, but it's basically the same criteria that the association have to do in insurance and budgeting and all of the rest. It's the same things over and over again. I just could not understand how we could just keep operating this way. Today's association issues. Harder than ever to fill board positions. We are bigger than the US Congress in terms of what we require here. 253 associations, if you really just kind of do a little quick math, we have some associations that have between 5 and 7 board members required, some of the bigger buildings, and then we have some of the smaller ones that are like 3 to 5. So I just took an average of 4, and I said, well, 253 times 4 is like 1,200. We need all these people on all these boards. Many are serving on boards that aren't here for 6 months of the year, And not necessarily because there's anything wrong with that, but because maybe they're the only ones raising their hands. No board for an association under 718, if you do not have a board, you run a big risk. And that's called receivership. And this is where the state can come in and appoint an attorney to basically run your association, and you have to pay whatever the costs are. So having no board is really not a great option. And I had a gentleman the last time I did this a couple of weeks ago that said, we are down to 3, and they have one of the largest buildings in the village in terms of number of unit owners. He said, we're down to 3, and by next year I think we'll be at 0 in terms of board. People just don't want to stay on it. They don't want to keep doing all the things we're doing. Board members today no longer wish to be superintendents, police, day-to-day managers, and they don't want the work of the association taking up all their fun time with association business. A lot of us who have come to Century Village around the same time I did, or after, or even before, are people who've worked a long time in their lives. In many cases, both spouses worked, had careers, and boy, when you retire, and you retire to Grossinger's, why? You know, we're doing a lot of work. It's a lot of work on these associations. And going back to earlier times, especially when Century Maintenance and Management was with us, everything was formed and geared and pointed toward the president of the building. And some of you may remember that, because if you had a board member contact and say, oh, we need some service over here, we have a problem, they'd say, oh, you gotta have your president call. You remember that? So presidents were really fielding an awful lot, and I think the area chairs have come a tremendous distance in being able to assist in a lot of ways there. But again, I'm still thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this. Criteria. I only had 3. What would I do if I could come up? What was my vision? What was I seeing? It had to be something that was allowed under the Florida statute. Not just because somebody wanted to blur the lines. It had to be legal. There had to be a way to do something legally. It had to be reasonably simple. Not simple, but reasonably simple. Enough that it could be explained, handled, and dealt with in a way that was relatively simple. And it had to accommodate intermittent entry. In other words, we've got 253 associations. Not in your wildest dreams would you think all of them are going to do the same thing at the same time. Different ones are going to have different feelings about what they might or might not do in the area of simplifying. So in 2010, I birthed CVE, what I call CVE Simplified, because that's what I was thinking, and I put an invitation in the Reporter to bring together those who saw these same kinds of problems growing and a way to find a simpler, better way to govern. 32 associations were represented in that meeting. Some are here tonight. And I was astounded. I never expected that many people. I thought maybe there'd be 5 of us. So I only got a little room. And the other thing that astounded me, and most of us in that room, was there was equal representation from gardens and high-rises. A lot of the people from the high-rises were saying, oh, you know, this is probably more of a garden issue. And then we asked for a show of hands who was here from gardens and who was here from high-rises. And we were like, whoa. I was quite surprised. Most of us were. Wonderful sharing of thoughts and concerns. Really people who, yes, we were all kind of struggling with this. There's got to be a better way. Different ideas, different thoughts, but very willing to share and discuss them. January 2011, I invited Wynmore's governing board to come. They have multi-condominium associations now. They're working hard, at least based upon what they told us that evening, to really form a single multi-condominium association, because they said even with the multiple ones we have, it gets nightmarish. One association, in their words, eliminates many of the governing and operational burdens. And that was what they basically told us at that meeting, and that they were in process of working on this. February 2011, I did invite 2 attorneys to meet, and this was now a much smaller group because at this point it was really only people who were more willing to get a little bit more involved and be helpful in terms of sharing information with me and being able to bounce ideas off of. And I did ask for 2 attorneys to come. They did do it gratis, can't imagine why. Yeah, really, I know, no brainer, right? I could have called 20 and they probably all would have jumped if I said Century Village East, 283, what? 283 associations? The potential money. But we know both of them. Most of you probably know at least one, if not both. One is Patrick Murphy. I know most of you know him from Cookby, from Master Management, and also he is an attorney for many of the associations. And the second was a gentleman by the name of Howard Pearl. And you may or may not know him if you went to the boot camp last year. If anybody went, how many went to that boot camp? He was one of the ones from KGB, and he heads up in their firm, their law firm, the association issues, and has been active and involved in multi-condo. And both of them, this was a first for me, I had 2 attorneys in one room, and they both, when we said, okay, I said, here, I'm thinking this, we got to simplify, there's got to be a way to do it, not that we have to simplify, but I'm thinking there might be a better way to do this, and both of them almost simultaneously said multi-condominium association, not multi-condominium. Multi-condominium is a whole different kettle of fish. That means that the condominium, which is the real property, actually get joined together into one. Now, it doesn't make it good or bad. Some have done that. But you need 100% approval from all of your unit owners. Yeah, right. Probably not in our lifetime. The multi-condominium association is much easier to form, not super easy. It's not like, boy, you can do this overnight. But it is much easier to form and a lot less expensive. In their language, it absolutely will streamline your governance and your operation, create opportunities for economies of scale, streamline communication. And streamlining communication, that's a huge issue, because when you're really trying to get something done, how it is communicated can either make getting it done effective or not. So in their opinion, these were some of the critical things. And the advantages, both of them said, the advantage, and especially Mr. Pearl, because he has actually been involved in assisting with the formation of multi-condos, he said the advantages in every single case that he's worked on have far outweighed the disadvantages. May 2011, I started legal research on my own. Reviewed documents because it's a question of some of the language that might be in older documents or not, to see if there was anything that might inhibit us. And I had people who actually are here and were here the other night that were very, very helpful in that, that sat and just read through documents with me. So it was nice to have some people who pitched in and others who were there to offer some advice and opinions. I did personally hire Mr. Pearl to go over some of the issues and questions that I had, and some of the highlights that I learned were any corporations can merge if the documents allow. Well, so can associations, but we're not doing corporation merger, and I didn't want to talk corporation merger, and he wasn't advocating it. Geography has no bearing. In other words, we could have a Tilford and an Oak Ridge, and they could become one association. Doesn't matter. He said, people start to think it's got to be the building next to you. He said, geography has nothing to do with it. This is a question of how do you want to be managed? How do you want to operate your buildings, your condominium? It's an operations issue. Maintain separate budgets. One of the very first thing I heard from a lot of people was, oh my God, we could never even consider that because I'm not sharing my big reserve account with somebody who's got no reserves. You're not taking my money. Well, the statute is written pretty well, and the statute actually requires that the association, the multi-condominium association, maintain separate budgets. Now, it only makes sense. We put on a new roof in Oak Ridge V right after Wilma because we lost it. It was in the parking lot across the street, literally. There were other buildings who had damage, and there were some who didn't have damage. Well, if you just put a brand new roof on and somebody else merges in together and they have a roof that's 15 years old, you can't have the same budget. It wouldn't even make sense. So it was interesting because he kept saying the statute allows for all of this. The statute makes it much easier. You may retain rental status. So you can merge together associations, and if one merging association has rental and the other does not, there's a respectful, okay, you can maintain it, you can keep it, it's part of your condo. It's part of your documents, you can hold on to that. So these were some of the top issues that most people would say to me, oh, you can't possibly even think of this. This is nuts. Well, the statute was showing me it wasn't so nutty. Most efficient and cost effective to create one set of multi-condominium documents, multi-condominium association documents, rather than having a lot of them. A, it keeps symmetry and it keeps things orderly. It makes for much easier management and operation. And again, the whole purpose is to attempt to simplify the village. So as other associations might want to join in, it's much easier for them, doesn't cost them as much. The documents are already there, they're just adopting them. They're paying to merge by having their own documents changed. And you have to have your declaration of condo changed. But it keeps the cost down, because I said I'm real sensitive about the cost issue on this stuff. Keeps the cost down. Association merging in changes its declaration to allow for the merger and adopt the new docs. So everybody would be reading the same documents, which most of our documents are pretty much the same. If you've ever read anybody else's besides your own, if you've ever read your own, most of them are the same. They're really not that different. Well, I was thinking, gee, there's got to be a better way. And then I found out a lot of great people were thinking it too, and continued to think it. So I proceeded, and now came to a place where I said, okay, I've paid the attorneys, I got the information, I've had good input from a wonderful group of people that I had a lot of respect for. We're all different, we all had different issues with their buildings. We talked about things like, oh, we should probably only have gardens with gardens and high-rises with high-rises. And the attorney said to me, oh, I don't think you want to do that. And I said, well, why not? He said, because it doesn't really matter. He said, much of what really matters is who's managing your property. How are they being handled and managed? And I thought, oh my God, I didn't even think of that. That's true. So in the vision of the future, let's move into the future. And my thought was, wow, this multi-condominium association idea it kind of answers the issues. Defined in the statute as means a real estate development containing 2 or more condominiums all of which are operated by the same association. Now, does that surprise you? You knew that definition was coming. Two or more that merge their associations together into one. Condominiums, still owned, that property is still owned separately, okay? The only thing that merges is the operating entity. One association that operates and manages multiple condominiums. Multi-condominium association, according to the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. This was interesting, and I think to share with you when I think of the future. Unpaid bad debt of one of the condominiums, with a multi-condominium, within a multi-condominium must be absorbed by the other owners in that condominium alone. Now, what this addresses is the issue that if you have a foreclosure, the foreclosure of a unit is really the property issue. It belongs to the condominium and is not governed under the association. So if you have that bad debt feature, the condominium itself shares that burden, not the association. It's only the people in that condominium. So what the statute does, and the way the Department of Business and Professional Regulations has set things up, is they're saying, now wait a minute, you can't spread bad debt for one condominium over everybody. We don't think that's fair. But bad debt for the association expenses absolutely should be spread out amongst all the members of the association. So the payment to your management company, your insurance payments, all of those things that we pay for under the association absolutely should be shared by everybody that's a unit owner under that association. So you got the distinction there? That was a news to me, because I kept hearing people say, oh, you got to, you know, everybody's going to absorb everybody else's problems in this. Well, not necessarily the case. It's a lot of learning. Multi-condominium association met the criteria. It fell under the Florida Statute 718. It allows for it. It actually defines it. Reasonably simple. Has anything I've said been overwhelming or difficult? Pretty straightforward. However many condominiums want to take their associations and squish them into one, they can do it. And it accommodates intermittent entry. With a single set of documents, at any point in time, another condominium association can say, you know what, we want to join into the CVE multi-condominium association. And it can be allowed for. So that intermittent entry became important. Because, again, 253 associations all thinking different things, no way they're all going to want to do this, at least not initially. Multi-condominium association takes us from this picture to one multi-condo association administering for all. So all of those things that we do 253 times come under one. Big question. What? You got to be kidding me. Many of you, I'm sure, inside, because you're being very polite, are not goofball laughing and saying, she's out of her mind. She's absolutely bonkers. And then others can get very angry about this and say, oh, no way. Nobody's taking away our authority and responsibility. We're going to govern ourselves, do ourselves, manage ourselves, and take care of ourselves because I'm the president and I want it that way, or for whatever the reasons are. But no way. Wouldn't work. Terrible. And then there's others who say, well, wait a minute. There just might be something in this. I'm not sure yet. But I'm seeing something that doesn't sound bad. I'm not chomping yet. My teeth aren't grinding yet. one multi-condo association administering for all. Now, separate budgets, not separate bank accounts, separate budgets, which means that your bank accounts need to tie to what those budgets are. So in essence, you are allocating the dollar resources to those different budgets, and you have the ability to retain rentals. So it took the two biggest issues away. One board. Oh boy, this is a big stumbling block. You're out of your mind. Again, laughter. You gotta be crazy. One board, nobody's taking over my board. I'm not giving up my board. I operate my building. Nobody's going to take that. All different things came up. And then there were some who said, one board. One board. After our history, oh sure. Think about it. Why wouldn't people be concerned? And that's why the history that I learned and have shared with you, at least from my own perspective, it's only my perspective, but I did validate. I happened to have a neighbor who actually was part of the blended groups, and he's been really wonderful and forthcoming. But I lived it too. I saw it since 2003. One board do all the work. Another big question. All that stuff that we do, you're going to have one board take care of all of that for how many buildings? 2, 6, 12, 253. Oh my God, you've got to be crazy. Nuts. No way. No way. You can't do it. Look, we do all this, and this isn't even everything. All this stuff. Well, there's something that I term as advanced management contracts. And I say advanced management contracts because in my background with condominiums, I never saw management firms doing what they do in Century Village. I saw whole different things. And when I say whole different, what happens under what can be a well-run management contract is the things that the board does here, they don't do. The management company does. They are delegated to the management company. The management company does a lot of the work. We'd go to a board meeting once a month. If there was a major issue, we might get called upon. But the management company did a lot of the work. So many of the things that we do, if you have lived in some other condos and had the experience that I've had living in 3 different ones prior to this, it doesn't work like this. I was amazed when I came here and saw what presidents do here and what boards do. So things start to go away from that day-to-day management. It isn't really an advanced contract and being new. These kinds of management assistants have been out there for years. The question is, how did we write our management contracts? And if you go back in your memory bank to an earlier part of this presentation, I talked about Century Maintenance and Management. The management contract that was developed at that time was used as when negotiations started with Seacrest, that contract was handed to Seacrest and they said match it. Not, is there a better way? Are there other ways to do this? It's, this is the way we're used to running. We really want to, see how you do these things. And I can understand that in a sense because when you're used to doing things a certain way, you want to make sure as best you can that apples to apples, are we going to be okay? We got a lot of buildings here. We got a lot of associations. I can understand that concern. So I'm not going to cast aspersions on it, but from my perspective, because I had come from other different kinds of condominiums, when I read it, I was amazed. So it isn't really advanced from my perspective. So it goes from there to here. From here, with everything, to a lot less work. So I would be, in my vision, dreaming up an advanced management contract. They already exist. Legal steps for merging associations. Merging associations, not condos, that's important. Condominium owns the property. The association handles the operation of the common elements. Everybody's cool with that. Create one set of corporate documents. Keeps the cost down. CVE Multi-Condominium Association, Inc. For lack of a better term, I gave it a name. CVE Multi-Condominium Association, Inc. Articles of incorporation and bylaws are what are created for that association. So that has to be developed. I already have pretty much a blueprint, but it needs a lot of research and work. Again, because I sought legal advice and paid for it, I started to get a sense, because I said I had to see that you could get your arms around this thing before taking it any further. So yeah, it's possible to do, and I'm very, very willing to do the work on that. Legal steps for merging also require, the statute requires that the separate budgets are maintained. Okay, the financial plan, the separate budget, not separate bank accounts, but separate budgets. And the budget ties to dollars in the bank. So every budget for every association that merges is showing a dollar amount that they're supposed to be collecting, dealing with, and paying out, and what their game plan is in their reserves, and the monies pretty much match up to that. So again, not a big secret. It's all open stuff. Budgets are open, we know that. Flexibility to retain the rental status, that was important. Basically, these requirements are the same for the most part anytime you want to make an amendment to your documents. This is pretty much the same if you were at the CVE meeting, not this past one, yeah, about a month ago, 2 months ago, there was, Patrick Murphy came and talked about some of this. Each merging association adopts a plan of merger, which includes, now this is, if you want to join in, this is what each one of our associations would have to do independent of the other. Adopt a plan of merger, the names of the merging corporations, so let's say Oak Ridge V Condo Association, Inc., and the name of the surviving corporation, CVE Multi-Condominium Association, Inc. The board of each merging corporation has to adopt a resolution approving the plan. So the board of the association, you have to have 66% of the board saying they want to do this, that they approve adopting the plan. And then that board directs that it be submitted for vote at a meeting of the membership, either at an annual or a special meeting. What percentage of the membership would need to vote? Would need to vote affirmative? 75. This is not a 100% vote, it is a 75, exactly. Very good. So written notices have to be sent with the proposed plan summary. That's why those legal documents need to be done up front. Membership votes on proposed plan of merger. 2/3 or 75% in favor, the plan's adopted. So it's the same thing as if you were going to be changing or amending your documents anyway. Okay, no different there. The plan of merger is done by each merging corporation. The legal effect of the merger, the surviving association is the only association. So if you merge in, what you're basically doing is taking the old association, closing it out, joining into the new, and that's what survives. So the CVE Multi-Condo Association would be the surviving association. CVE Multi-Condo, that's the one. Articles of incorporation would begin to specify, or would specify, board sizes, elections, the same things. If you look at these steps for how things happen, etc. CVE Multi-Condominium Association maintains separate budgets. We know that. We talked about it. Now, when you look at board size, elections, etc., in your documents, in each one of our documents, where does it have that? Bylaws. The how-tos are in the bylaws for sure. You got your articles of incorporation. That's for the association. That incorporated the association that you currently have. You have bylaws, And some things need to tie to the declaration, but that's what each individual building changes, is the declaration to allow for this. It's really no different. If you closed your eyes and you took my vision and just allowed it to float in your head for a few minutes and said, well, okay, all right, let me get my arms around this. I got 6 buildings. They all own the property, but we've merged together and we got this one association. If you then opened your eyes and read your documents, your articles of incorporation and your bylaws, they're going to kind of read the same way. It's going to give you the specifics of how it runs, how it operates, what the rules are, etc. Most of which are already in place in our documents. We just update everything to make sure that it encompasses some of the new things that are coming up or have come up and we haven't changed our documents to meet. Corporations remain separate. CVE Multi-Condominium Association operates all common areas. That's really it. That's really it. Now, what might a board look like? Because I've had a lot of questions about that. How would you put together this board? I mean, oh my God, we've got so many buildings. Well, I think we'd have to be pretty progressive. In my vision, I saw it as kind of evolutionary. Absolutely, it would always plan for an odd number. Did you ever try to run a board with an even number? When you can't feel the whole board and you're sitting there with 6 people and you got a decision to make and you're split, it isn't funny. So definitely you want to appoint, but always an odd number. So let's say from the start we've got somewhere between 2 to 6 that merge together. Well, we'd allow for the 1 to 3 directors. Now, just like when you look at your documents, way back in the beginning, you could have 3, okay? But it would be per what? Per condominium. So you'd have only a need for somewhere between 1 and 3 from each. To make it an odd number, if you indeed had, let's say, 3 buildings, and each one elected their 2 members, now you would have a 1 at large. You just add that extra number and you'd say, okay, this person is running at large. So there might be more than one who would run at large. And that's how you might vote for yourself. So it just makes for this to work. Let's say we had 7 merged. Well, now some magic starts to happen with certain numbers that happen. And in business, we always worked with that and said, well, when organizations get to be a certain size, you need to kind of restructure a little bit to allow them to run reasonably. So the docs might then allow for 1 director for each condo because you got 7 buildings. That'd be easy. You only have to vote for 1. Now, I haven't shown you any more than 2. Might have trouble getting 2, but probably, initially we could field that. Down to 1. So the more that join, the better and easier it gets for everybody. Now, let's say we had 10 or more. 1 from each. 10 or more. Now, at a certain point in time, you run into a hit point. Most often, meetings, and to be able to accomplish things in a reasonable way, somewhere between the number of 12 and 15, or 13 and 15, or 11 and 15, it can work. Once it gets over the 15 number, boards start to disintegrate. It gets harder. But with 253, now think about it. We've got how many areas today? 21. Well, some of those areas only have 2 buildings. Some have 4. Some don't know the difference or have anything to do with one size building versus another. Some are all gardens. Some are all high-rises. Well, we could actually, and we played with the numbers and looked at it, we could actually bring it down to somewhere around 13, 11 or 13 areas, if indeed they were combined. Now, under the multi-condo, you can do that. And there, we're using the concept of the area chair in the sense, which is a wonderful concept. Wonderful. And say, well, why reinvent the wheel? Have those areas, if everybody was involved or we were big enough, put a person on the board. Vote for their person. At large numbers, the larger the numbers, the areas might change a bit. We could reduce it down to probably 13 or something else. We played with the numbers and you certainly can get it down. More areas combined of gardens and high-rises because there's a good sensitivity around that. When we first talked and said they should be separate, and the attorney said, I don't know if you want to do that. And the logic as we walk through that is the sensitivity that there are differences between the two and they need to be considered. So if there's only going to be one board for the multi-condominium, we need as many people on that board who are sensitive to both gardens and high-rises. So it just makes sense from the personal and more human side and also the business side to say we have to think about these and think about decisions we make and how they impact gardens and high-rises. So each area in that sense would elect its one board member, larger pools of candidates. Think about it. You can actually try to get the best of the best. Doesn't always work, but you can try. The best of the best. Maybe the most qualified. Wow. We're looking at these people's backgrounds. Geez. Or we've seen what this person can do. We've seen how they act with people. We've seen how they communicate. We like what we see. We're going to go for that. So it's a way of being able to do that. The benefits, no more trouble fielding 253 boards. Power to negotiate and purchase now falls under that single entity. The economies of scale are reached. Very transparent. Absolutely transparent. And in my vision, more transparent than probably some of our 253 associations that operate today, where many people who live in that building, A, don't know what's going on, B, don't have much access to it, and if they do, they don't have a lot to say about it. When meetings are run, how they're run, where's the agenda, am I actually seeing an agenda? Do I actually sit in on a meeting? Most people don't. But visibility, in at least my vision. Action's very visible. Again, because the board is not necessarily doing everything. But when it acts, it's going to be visible. Enhanced management, we talked about that. Reduce the board's day-to-day functions. Much more cohesive systems. Property value enhancements, a big benefit. When people come in here, they don't really realize what they're buying into. It takes a while. It took me quite a while to figure out how it all worked. Now, it's much easier today than it was back in 2003. But when you start to see more cohesiveness for a condominium area, groups of associations, groups of condominiums, property values can be impacted by your neighbor. Benefits, definitely money. And this was the biggie. There's tremendous savings. Insurance, one of the largest single annual costs for all of us. All associations buy the same 5 policies. 6 associations, if they merged together, with 256 units among them. 6 associations times 5 policies is 30 policies. Put it under one multi-condo, you only have 5 policies, not 30. Annual savings, approximately $2,000. 10 years of savings, $20,000. Now that's just for 6 condos. Insurance, largest single cost, 14 associations. What happens when you start getting bigger? And what I learned in my research is, obviously the bigger the better for purposes of being able to get better pricing. 14 associations, because insurance companies, they're working off of the number of units. That's what they work on. So each one I talk to, yep, based on the number of units. 70 policies versus 5 annual savings. Now you're looking at a 10-year savings of $55,000. Numbers get sizable, and that's just insurance. 253 associations pay for appraisals, hopefully every 2 years. The ones under citizens for sure have to do that. 253 times, let's say, $100 per reappraisal. That's $25,300 every 2 years, all separately hired and scheduled at different times, so the cost is much higher. Well, what would happen? In 10 years, that's about $126,000. It's a lot of money. One multi-condominium association, up to 20% savings over 10 years. If you can get 20% savings, you've saved $25,000 in just 10 years. Purchasing power. If I know, if let's say I'm on the board of the multi-condo, and I know, based on the budgets and the reserves and everything else, that we've got 10 buildings that are going to need a new roof within X period of time. Well now, unlike Cookvie, who cannot actually put their name to something, our board can negotiate for the 10 buildings. We're handing a contractor, not one building, 10. And we're saying, okay, I know what you'll charge me for one. What are you going to charge me for 10? And we all know that's pretty powerful stuff. Economies of scale in this big village are amazing. Painting, if you're reskinning your building, any of these, our walkways, okay, in terms of our catwalks. Laundry, we're paying $299 a month on a contract. We got all brand new equipment. If we handed them 10 buildings and said, we'll contract for this for 10 buildings, I mean, it's amazing what you can save. Government association fees, 253 associations are all paying association fees. It only comes out to maybe $50 a year. It's not a lot of money because some of them you don't pay every year. $12,653 a year. Doesn't sound like a lot. 10 years, though, of paying it out, $126,000. Cookvie fees. Now, I say that because if you form a multi-condo association, do you really need Cookvie? No, because you're doing that work, but you now have the authority to do the contracts, make the decisions, etc. So you've really gone into the wonderful world of what, good or bad, and whether it was deliberate, Mr. Trinchi might have been thinking of. I don't know. But the idea of joining it all together. But in this case, it's legal. It's legal. So Cookvie fees, $8 a unit, am I right? Now look at this one. 8,508 units, $68,000 a year. Look at the savings. I mean, it's kind of amazing when you look at what's involved in this. And that doesn't take away from the fact that Cookvie's doing a great job and whatever, with what they have to live with and deal with. And not today, they face up to the fact and know and are really operating beautifully in that sense that they cannot make agreements and arrange. They can't sign the dotted line. They can just negotiate. It's a lot of money. So the benefits, legally streamlining governance, operation, and management, and saving some very good money. The economies of scale are incredible. My action plan. I'm just here right now educating. I'm educating myself. I'm learning. I'm going to professionals when I get to a point where I say, okay, I've got a bunch of questions. I need to be straightened out. I hire the professional. There's only so much more I can do of that. It gets very costly on your own. But then to be able to share that information and educate, at least in my vision, like I said, you can call it whatever you want, you can call me any name you want, and you can tell people this is the most horrible, stupid thing you ever heard of. And that's your prerogative. It's only my vision. But if you share any piece of it, which I know some of you do, education is the key here. And it has to be education based upon good information. And I'll tell you, one of the best things that happened to me last week after I did the first presentation was that one of the people there emailed me and sent me a merger plan that was done by another condominium group in northern Florida. And it's about the fourth one I've read. There aren't too many out there that are public, but this one I read. And he said in his email, read this. These were your words. This was written by the attorneys. It validated the information. And this person said, gee, it isn't just you talking. This is actually, so far, pretty much the truth in terms of what the multi-condominium association means. In terms of my interpretation of the history of Century Village, take that as my interpretation of history. Our minds act in interesting ways. But educate, educate, educate. Schedule presentations for next season. I know we have a lot of people leaving. I was asked to do this one as fast as I could for people who are going to be leaving. But schedule them ahead of time. Come to area meetings once people have seen the presentation to be able to come to an area meeting. And do more research and legal planning. Again, I'd have to talk about, with those who are interested, how we're going to fund that, but more research and legal planning would be required. And I really believe in my vision. I truly believe that there's a way to make things better. So I'm very, very much, I will not be working next year. I will be completely retired, and I'm going to really dedicate to doing as much research and planning as I can on this, depending on how many are showing interest. What can you do? Absolutely contact me to get on the email if you want to be kept informed. I do put writings in the Reporter, but that does only come out once a month. So if something's happening pretty quickly, like this meeting, if you're on the email list, you'd get a notification. And then arrange presentations for your area. Pardon? I absolutely will, and you're going to see a picture of it in a moment. Okay? That's a great question. You just said, well, what is that email address? Which is a great question. And what you can do is just spread the word. If you feel this has any value, you've only been to one presentation. Some of you have actually come for a second time. It's a lot of information. I have spent a year doing this research. I've really tried to do as much as I can to be as aware. Am I perfect? No. Do I know everything? Absolutely not. Will I need an attorney? Oh my God, we all will. And you do need an attorney to file most of this stuff. But through what I'm learning, I'm finding ways that can make it more cost effective. And I will share with you that I did actually confront one attorney and said, okay, if we did this thing. Now, you'll see if you read any others from the state of Florida, 15,000, et cetera. But if we did this, what can we do if I'm willing to put the docs together and do most of the writing? Of course, it all has to go through legal approval. But that writing time, it's all time. Lawyers charge it by time. If I'm willing to do that, we can put the docs together, and all you have to do is really fine-tune, but you don't have to write them from scratch. And let's see, if we can have one set of docs and we've got 6 buildings that want to merge. And the answer I got was, oh, initially, when I looked, was 10,000. When I said, and that's each building. And I said, all right, now, we got 6 buildings. They all want to merge. You got to be able to do something better than that if we're doing all this work for you. And the answer I got was, oh, you could seriously reduce it to 3 to 5. Now that to me was and I did not negotiate. I just asked the question. And we know lawyers do not like to talk money. Okay? But I got, okay, a little sit back, and they took a few minutes, and he said, you could probably get this down to 3 to 5. Now, it sounds like a prison sentence. But in spite of that, the fact is, again, the economies of scale work. So if you think this might be something you really want to learn more about, I'll do everything I can to provide it. There are other people I know who are willing to help, and we'll do that. If you think this is absolutely the most insane, crazy thing, then put it on your blog, tell the world, I don't care what you do with it, because that's your opinion, and you have an absolute right to it, as I do mine. So I expect to see a lot of both, but there's the email address. So if and only if, and I ask you this really because to me it will be very important for me, please get on my email list if you're interested. If you really think this is stuff you don't want to be part of, or you think I'm, speaking like somebody in the Alps and you can't understand them at the top of the mountain and this is crazy, then do whatever you wish to do and go try to find some other way. If you believe that everything's fine and you think CVE operates perfectly and you're great with it, or not perfect, but good, great. It's wonderful. I have no problem with that. And this isn't for everybody. But I'd like to say, if 4 of us join, 6 of us join, 8 of us join together, and we make this thing work, and I figure a good 2-year learning curve once we start to really make it work well, because it always takes a learning curve, I think others will look and say, at some point, you know what? I'm joining in. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. Thank you.